So why is the interaction of a tablet and screencasting good for this? So if you look, I apologize about how I scanned this in. I know it looks really bad, but this is a question taken directly out of World of Chemistry, which is the book our juniors are using right now. And it's a worked example that we see. This is the book that all my students are going to have. It's a great worked example, right? Oops, sorry, that's what you're going to see in a sec. It breaks out the variables for them, it gives them the equations, it rearranges it, tells them everything they need to do. But what are some problems about this right now? Does anyone see anything? If you were a student, yeah. Okay, so the way that they showed the units being canceled here? Anything else? Everything's already there, right?
It's not phased in at all.
Not phased in. Our inner Dan Meyer is like freaking out right now, right? So, anything else? Yeah, there's a lot of things we assume. What about where we're getting all the info? Where's all the information going in through? All right, right? All right. So all the information's going in through one place. It's already there. We're assuming the students are going to put a note card over it or something and go through it that way. You know, we're leaving a lot up to them, but it's better than nothing. And I remember when I first started teaching, this is what I would make and actually give them worksheets that had things, and I felt like I was doing an amazing thing that way. So I simply made a quick video of this exact same thing, showing the exact same steps, but just using a screencast. So if you look at that, some of you who know chemistry are like, I get it. And some of you are a little intimidated, right? So
in this gas problem straight out of your textbook. So in this problem, it says you have a sample of hydrogen gas with a volume of 8.56 liters, a temperature of 0 degrees Celsius, and a pressure of 1.5 atmospheres. And it's asking you to calculate the moles, and we're talking pressure, volume. The volume was 8.5, one volume, one temperature, more than one T, or more than one N. We would get a new equation that says N atmospheres, it is. Volume supposed to be in liters, 3 Kelvin here. You to solve for gram, K cancels, and of hydrogen gas.
Okay, so I wasn't going to make you go through that. But obviously you can see if you're watching that as a student, that just feels better, right?
Well, as a horrible math person, I love the fact that you show me the process.
Yeah. And the thing that you didn't see, because I didn't make you sit through the whole thing, was that there was a ton of stuff I said that I didn't write. So if you got all that information on the previous model, that page would have been cluttered. But because now I have 2 channels to work with, I have ears and eyes, I can throw way more information at them. They're not going to have to think about it simultaneously because I'm not going to write it and say it. I'm either going to say it or I'm going to write it, or I'm going to do a teeny bit of both. Right? So all that really overlaps well with, we'll call it the cognitive architecture. So let's look at that. Here's that box again that we saw last time. So we got this intrinsic and extraneous load. So what are some ways we can minimize that, and how did it relate to what we just watched? If we offload text, so what I mean by that are things that I would normally write, now I'm going to say. Okay? So you're manipulating the fact that you have 2 places information can go. If we chunk material, so you didn't see it all at once, I brought it in segments. Okay, and then if we could pre-train students like I was talking about. So that video could have been what they watched for homework. All 3 of these things, a guy, you know, most of this research comes out of Santa Barbara by a guy named Rich Mayer. There's a lot of multimedia learning theory stuff. He says that all these things will minimize intrinsic load. Extraneous load, so the environment, interactivity. So if the student can rewind you, and I think James was getting at this, I almost think there's a justice issue if you walk into class and you teach kids in class. They can't rewind you. If they do, you're eventually going to get annoyed. You're not going to say it the same way. Right? And then the kid who's gone, it doesn't get it, and then it's gone. It's like, I remember Chem 2A with like 450 kids in class, and it was just ridiculous when I was in college. So if a student can interact with it, that is huge for the environment. This is the big one. It's the personalization. So my kids watch a Khan Academy video and they get me in class. He says aqueous instead of aqueous. Right? I did one Khan Academy video and he said aqueous, and then I came into class and said aqueous, and that's all they paid attention to. Was the difference we said. It was great, and I actually use Khan Academy a lot for reference for myself and for my students, but if I'm doing pre-training, I want it to be the exact same voice. You know, looking at it through a lens of cognitive load. So that's why, for me, empowering you guys to be able to do it, it's a big thing. It's for this research-based thing. And also directing their attention. If you notice, I was underlining things, I was highlighting things, I was telling them what to look at that given time. So those things are going to really mess with extraneous load. So we got things that'll decrease complexity and things that'll make the environment more fluid. None of them are going to sacrifice the material itself. And now there's more room in the working memory. Any questions on the research side of things? And there's a lot of other ways of looking at this through a lens of neuroscience as well. But this was just where my research in college was. So the design.
But I didn't think it would be something that would somehow penetrate the classroom. But then I started getting letters from teachers. And the teachers would write saying, we've used your videos to flip the classroom. You've given the lectures. So now what we do, and this could actually happen in every classroom in America tomorrow, what I do is I assign the lectures for homework, and what used to be homework, I now have the students doing in the classroom. And I want to pause here for I want to pause here for a second because there's a couple of interesting things. One, when those teachers are doing that, there's the obvious benefit. There's the benefit that now their students.
All right. So before, if you guys, hopefully a lot of you have seen Saul Kahn's TED Talk. This is where he got in a little bit of trouble after this talk. I think if you guys read a lot of the blogs online, he got in trouble. I think at that exact moment right there, where he said what he did, I feel, was reduce this process down to one thing. This assumption, this paradigm that we all teachers lecture. That's what we do. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to take the lectures out of the classroom and we need to open up the classroom. So that's a really, really great idea, and a lot of teachers lecture, including myself a lot of the time. Okay? But because he doesn't have a background in education, I think a lot of the people who are really passionate, especially physics teachers, about inquiry-based learning, modeling, things like that, you know, they're not lecturing at all. They're using their classroom in really, really awesome ways, and I think this really rubbed people the wrong way a little bit. For me, it just defined the process in a way that was a little bit too simple, and it reduced it down to still just direct instruction, but online. You know, we don't really want to think about it that way.
Can enjoy the videos in the way that my cousins did. They can pause, repeat at their own pace, at their own time. But the more interesting thing, and this is the unintuitive thing when you talk about technology in the classroom, by removing the one-size-fits-all lecture from the classroom and letting students have a self-paced lecture at home. And then when you go to the classroom, letting them do work, having the teacher walk around, having the peers actually be able to interact with each other. These teachers have used technology to humanize the classroom. They took a fundamentally dehumanizing experience, a bunch of 30 kids with their fingers on their lips, not allowed to interact with each other. A teacher, no matter how good, has to give this kind of one-size-fits-all lecture to 30 students, you know, blank faces, slightly antagonistic, and now it's a human experience. Now they're actually interacting with each other.
So that's a huge point. And to me, that's the major, major benefit of just flip teaching in general. What a lot of people don't talk about then is, okay, what do we do now that we have that extra time in the class? Because you take a teacher who's so used to lecturing and you give them the whole classroom period, and a lot of the professional development, when you guys go back, if some of you are interested in this, is helping people understand how to group students and how to do activities that make use of that 50 minutes that you now have in class. So after watching this, I came up with my own definition of what I think flip teaching is for me. And I define it as using native teacher produced, so I say native teacher produced to maximize the personalization effect, to decrease extraneous load, to shift any form of instruction, anything, from the classroom to the homework setting. So I think that's a broader definition for me. It's not saying we're going to take lecture and put it away. It's saying we're going to open up 5 minutes of class time by putting something in the homework setting. So you're using the homework in a meaningful way. And we're going to talk later about ways of ensuring students are using that in a meaningful way. That's a definition that I think is whittled down to what it means to me. So let's look at some models of ways to do this. You guys, anyone read Drive by Dan Pink? Right? Amazing book, right? There's a moment in that book where he makes this statement, and I think he's really just naturally alluding to. I mean, he spends this whole book talking about what motivates students. Right? So his mind is all, or what motivates people. And then he says, with a little thought and effort, we can turn homework into home learning. It was a moment in that book, and I think that really, really, to me, defines exactly what bothered me initially when I saw kids in the hallway copying stuff down. So I think that's a really huge point. He actually went on about a couple months later to publish an article in an online magazine called The Telegraph that featured a teacher named Carl Fish out of Colorado. It's called Flipteaching. And I think he realized this was happening, brought out other teachers like Aaron Sams and John Bergman out of Colorado that are doing amazing stuff, kind of the pioneers of this movement. And that word flip really became branded at that time. So he was big on that. And to me, he's really convincing. I love Dan Pink's work, just the way that he articulates things. So it was nice to see him on board with the movement as well. So if you look at a standard class design, I'm talking chemistry right now. I sent an email out to the AP Chemistry listserv a couple of years ago and just said, what does your normal class look like to everybody? And this was really what I got back. And it looks a lot like my chemistry class in high school, but it was 5-minute warm-up, 15 minutes for homework review, instruction 30 minutes, and practice time 10 minutes. Call it the standard class design. So where do you guys think the most meaningful learning occurs? If you had to pick one place or two places.
I'm going to say warm up and practice.
Okay. Anyone else?
Warm up and instruction.
Warm up and instruction.
Homework review.
If it's done right, homework review.
So obviously the answer is all of them are meaningful. But in terms of the research, the stupid question, right? So it turns out in terms of the research, though, like Rich Mayer would say and John Sweller would say that John was right. Warm up and practice are where they're moving the information back and forth. That's like how you would define learning, forming schema. That's where that's happening. However, they need, like in James' class, they don't know about history, right? They need that. We all, like, and this is what makes our job fun too. There's a fun thing about having information that you're giving to somebody. Like that's a fun aspect of teaching. So they're all important, but the question then becomes when should they occur? You know, if we have this outside of class time and we have this inside of class time, what do we want to have control over? So the traditional flip model says we can get the instruction out, okay, call that the homework, and then we can fill the rest of the class time in with practice. That's kind of the traditional flip model that Salkan was talking about. If you ever have listened to at ISTE, Aaron Sams and John Bergman talk about it, this is kind of the essence of the mastery learning model with flip teaching, where students are working through it at their own pace. And we'll call that the traditional flip design. So now you have this 60 minutes of in-class, or 50 minutes of in-class time. What are you going to do with that now, right? You're going to get kids grouped differently. You're going to find kids that need to be retaught, have them aside. You're going to assign master student teachers to work with other kids. You're going to use that time to push kids forward on lab activities, working through problems that they would normally not have done. You're going to have like this control thing over their ability to do hard problems. So for me as an AP teacher, this was great because I could give my students the hardest problem I've ever seen in my life, that if I gave them for homework, I would be crucified on things like rate my teacher and all that kind of stuff, right? But if I give it to them in class, I can watch them just struggle, and I can know in my head that I'll tell them how to do it before they walk out of that door, right? So then I really just, it was amazing watching the things that they would cognitively struggle with and me feeling good about it because I wasn't going to leave them having to go to bed with that struggle. So that's why I like having control over the practice in class.
Ramsey,
Yeah.
I I want to just bring up a point here, because when I've talked to people about doing this, one of the things they bring up is, well, but I really like to be able to see my kids' faces as I'm teaching, doing that 30 minutes of instruction. So, and I've always kind of struggled with that, because of course you want to be seeing who's getting it and who's not. But I like what you just said, and I'm actually speaking up so that I can remember this better, that I would flip that on them and say, you still get to do some of that, and make sure that before they leave, you're comfortable with where they're at, and if they do get it, because you allowed them to practice, and made sure they got it before they left.
Yeah. Well, and you know, first of all, if you look at any research, it's 80-20 student effect, teacher effect, right? So teacher really already only has 20% effect, and then you're standing up and going 1 on 30, so you're diluting that 20% big time, right? And that's what Khan said. He said it's a dehumanizing experience. You're turning it into a humanizing experience. Whereas I know that those 5 kids are rock stars. I just know that because you know and you get to know your students. And I can sit down and work with somebody directly, you know, and that is way more of a humanizing experience. Also, if they're plugged in watching the lecture the night before, that is also more humanizing because they're getting it one-on-one and they're able to rewind it. And I'm respecting the technology that exists as well. Yeah.
Do you build in any type of feedback or request any input from the students when they are watching those videos at home?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to get to that. And that really gets to the meat of when this started working for me. So this is the model that I use in my classroom, and this is based on the work of a guy named Karplus. He was a physics instructor in the early 70s. And the reason that I like, and this is what I've done for the last 2 years, the reason I like this is because it's really just a learning cycle that works really well for science learning specifically. The original Karplus model, there's a great blog actually by Frank Nocesi, and if anybody has read his blog, where he compared Khan to Karplus, and he was one of the huge people that was kind of a opponent to the Khan Academy online over the last couple of months. But the original Karplus model is explore, explain, apply. So what I did is just took the explain and flipped it. So the explain piece is what happens online. So it's a 2-day cycle instead of a 3-day cycle. So the first day, students will come into class and we'll do an inquiry-based lab activity. Minimal instructions, little bit of lab, a little bit of a worksheet maybe. They're in groups, and it's things like dissolve this salt until it doesn't dissolve anymore, and figure out, you know, the maximum amount of stuff that can dissolve, or, you know, something just really, really open-ended. Okay? But that is related to the concept of, let's say, molarity, that they are then, that night, then going to watch a video on. So no longer is flipped teaching just direct instruction. Flipped teaching is the second day of a learning cycle where they've already had a chance to struggle with it. And this is huge in science because it's really it's one of the only subjects where they've lived in this subject their whole life. So they come to the table with all this prior knowledge and jumbled up stuff that needs to be organized. And if you organize it by saying, here's the truth first, sometimes they're going to struggle with that. They want to play with it first and convince themselves that there are some misconceptions before we then fill it in. And then the next day, we do classroom application. So the way I always choose what the application is what is the end result. So in AP class, we're working through AP problems. In my regular class, we're doing real-life example problems and standards-based stuff.